He saved a mother and her newborn twins from the snow, but when spring came, the man who left her to die rode back to claim them. The storm had raged for 2 days straight, a white wall that erased everything it touched. In that blinding wilderness, Ethan Ward, a quiet rancher known more for ghosts than company, heard something that didn't belong to the wind, a cry, thin and broken, cutting through the blizzard like a prayer. He found her there, collapsed beside a fence post, her wrists bound with rusted wire, 2 infants pressed against her chest to steal what little warmth she had left. Her lips moved only once. "Don't let him take them." Then she went still. Ethan tore the wire free, wrapped her in his coat, and carried the 3 of them through the storm. He didn't know her name, only that the snow would claim her within minutes if he hesitated. At his cabin that night, the fire burned hotter than it had in years, the sound of 2 tiny breaths echoing in a place that had forgotten the sound of life. By morning, the woman stirred. Clara Reeves. A name heavy with sorrow. A name that would change everything. Outside, the storm calmed, but inside Ethan's chest, a different storm began, one made of duty, guilt, and something dangerously close to hope. Because saving her had been easy, keeping her alive would cost him everything. The sun never fully reached the valley that winter. It only brushed the peaks before slipping away, leaving behind a world of pale blue silence and frost-bitten pine. Ethan Ward's cabin stood alone at the edge of the Bitter Creek Basin, one crooked chimney, one stable half collapsed from snow, and miles of wilderness between him and the nearest soul. He had chosen this isolation 2 years ago, after the fever took his wife and unborn child. Since then, he'd lived by rhythm hunt, mend, survive, nothing more, nothing less. Now, everything was different. Inside, the fire clawed at the cold, while the scent of boiled milk filled the air. The woman he'd rescued, Clara Reeves, lay beneath a heap of blankets, her skin ghost pale but alive. Beside the hearth, 2 tiny bundles squirmed softly, each wrapped in pieces of his old flannel shirts. Every sound, a cough, a stir, a cry, felt too fragile for the silence this place once held. Ethan kept moving, feeding the fire, melting snow for water, refusing to think. Yet the questions pressed harder than the storm outside. Who would tie a mother to die in the cold? Who was him? And why did her words "don't let him take them" echo louder in his chest than the wind? He told himself it didn't matter. He'd do what any decent man would. Keep them alive, see them through the thaw, then send them east to safety. That was all. But each night, when the fire dimmed and the twins' soft breathing filled the cabin, Ethan's hand would hover over the door latch, ready for the knock he knew would come. Because in this land, no sin stayed buried and no good deed went unpunished. 3 days after the storm broke, Clara woke with a start, gasping, disoriented, her eyes darting between the flicker of firelight and the stranger who sat sharpening a knife by the hearth. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd died. But then she saw them, the twins swaddled and breathing softly in a basket lined with fur. She reached for them, trembling. "They're safe," Ethan said quietly, not looking up. His voice was steady, the kind that belonged to a man who'd forgotten how to lie. She tried to sit up, failed, then whispered, "You shouldn't have helped me." Ethan frowned. "Would have been wrong not to." Clara's gaze fell to the scars along her wrists, deep, angry welts from the wire that had held her. She spoke in a whisper barely stronger than the fire's hiss. "My husband," he said, "daughters are curses. That no real man would feed 3 mouths that can't bear his name." Her voice cracked. "He left us there to die." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't ask her name again. He already knew too much. He stood and poured her a cup of warm water, setting it near her shaking hands. "You're safe here," he said, though his eyes betrayed the uncertainty of those words. Clara nodded weakly, clutching her daughters. "He'll come," she murmured. "He always does." Ethan looked toward the door, the snow still piled high against it. In the faint reflection of the window, he saw his own haunted face, a man who'd once failed to protect the only family he'd ever had. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt fear not for himself, but for someone else. The next days unfolded in a fragile rhythm, the kind that comes only when 2 people are trapped between winter and the memory of death. Ethan chopped wood, tended the fire, and hunted for whatever life the frozen valley still offered. Clara stayed by the hearth, feeding the twins with trembling hands, her silence heavier than the mountains themselves. At first, they spoke little. Words were dangerous, they could wake things. Neither of them was ready to face. But as the nights grew longer, and the wind softened from a scream to a whisper, small fragments of truth began to break through. She told him her husband's name, Warren Reeves, a man who owned half the valley down south. A cattle baron, charming in church, merciless at home. He wanted a son, she said one evening, voice flat. Said God had cursed me with girls. When the second was born, he stopped speaking to me. When the third came, her gaze drifted to the twins, sleeping in their cradle. He said I wasn't worth feeding anymore. Ethan didn't ask how she'd escaped. The rope burns on her wrists told him enough. He just nodded once, stoked the fire, and muttered, "You ain't his anymore." But they both knew the world didn't care what a man said in the dark, only what he could enforce with a gun. By February's end, the snow began to soften. Streams carved small veins through the ice, and sunlight spilled across the ridges. Ethan felt the change before he saw it, a subtle shift in the air, in the way the crows went silent when the wind carried sound from below. "Riders," he muttered one morning, squinting from the doorway. 3, maybe 4. Dark specks moving along the lower pass. Too far to name, too deliberate to ignore. Clara froze mid-step, her hand gripping the table. "He's found us." Ethan turned to her. "Could be trappers." Her voice broke. "It's him. He'll burn the world to find what's his." Ethan's jaw flexed, a quiet muscle of defiance. "You and the girls ain't his to claim." She stared at him, the words barely a whisper. "The law says otherwise." That night, Ethan cleaned his rifle by the dim orange light, each motion slow and deliberate. The sound of metal on cloth filled the cabin like a heartbeat. Clara sat nearby, rocking one of the twins, her eyes fixed on the door. "You could still leave," she said finally. "Take your horse. Ride west before they get here." Ethan looked up, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression. Not pity, not fear, but something darker. "I buried my wife 2 winters ago," he said. "Fever took her and the baby. I couldn't save 'em, didn't even try fast enough. I'm done running from ghosts." He leaned the rifle against the wall. "If he comes, he'll find a man waiting." Clara turned away, tears bright in her eyes. She didn't thank him. Some debts couldn't be spoken aloud. 3 days later, the first knock came. Not the sound of knuckles but of boots crunching outside, deliberate, heavy. Ethan moved to the window, parted the curtain. 4 riders. One dismounted, tied his horse to the post, and stepped forward. Warren Reeves. Even through the frost-streaked glass, the man looked carved from cruelty tall, dressed in a long black duster, his hat shadowing eyes too calm for the cold. Ethan opened the door but didn't step aside. "You're lost," he said. Warren smiled, a sharp thing. "I'm found, actually. Took a while to track her, but I knew she'd run north. They always run where it's hardest to survive." His gaze drifted past Ethan's shoulder toward the fire inside. "You got something of mine." "She ain't yours," Ethan said. "Everything under my roof is mine," Warren replied softly. "And she was under my roof. That makes those girls mine, too." Ethan's voice dropped low. "Turn back." Warren's smirk widened. "I don't take orders from hired hands." He gestured, and one of his men stepped closer, hand resting on his gun. Ethan didn't reach for his. He didn't need to. His stillness spoke louder than a loaded chamber. "Next step you take," he said, "is the last one you'll ever own." The man hesitated. Warren studied him a long moment, then laughed. "You're a fool. This isn't over." He turned his horse and rode off, snow spraying beneath hooves like smoke. The others followed, but the echo of their threat lingered, long after the sound of hooves had died. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the cradle, watching her daughters breathe, while Ethan stood guard near the window, rifle in hand. "Why risk your life for me?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't turn. "Because someone should have, before it came to this." She pressed a hand to her heart. "He'll come back. He doesn't lose. Then he'll learn." There was no bravado in his tone, just certainty, the kind born from a man who had nothing left to lose. The storm came back in March. Wind clawed at the cabin walls, turning night into a roaring blur of white. Ethan reinforced the shutters, checked the fire, and told Clara to keep low. But just past midnight, over the howl of the blizzard, came the sound he'd been waiting for: horses. 4 again. No mistake this time. Ethan's heart thudded steady as a drum. He turned to Clara. "Take the girls. Out the back. Follow the creek west until you hit the ridge. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." "Lawn." Her eyes widened. "I can't leave you." He stepped close, pressing his hand over hers, rough and warm. "You can, and you will." He handed her a small revolver. "For them," he said simply. The knock hit the door a moment later, hard enough to rattle the hinges. Ethan took one last breath. "Go." She slipped out through the back, vanishing into the snow. He turned, cocked the rifle, and opened the door. The wind roared in, along with 3 men, guns drawn, faces hard. Warren stood behind them, smiling. "You should have stayed out of this, rancher." Ethan raised the rifle. "You first." The first shot shattered the lamp. The room exploded in orange light and smoke. Ethan dropped behind the table as bullets tore through the wood. The fire flared, throwing sparks like shrapnel. He rolled, fired once, a clean, sharp sound that ended with one man crumpling near the door. Another bullet grazed Ethan's shoulder, hot and sudden. He gritted his teeth, fired again. The second man fell. Only Warren remained. He stepped forward, calm as the devil. "You think this makes you a hero?" he sneered. "You think she'll love you for it?" Ethan's breathing slowed. "Don't care what she thinks. Only care that she's alive." They fired almost together. Warren's bullet grazed his rib. Ethan's hit true straight through the man's chest. Warren stumbled, eyes wide in disbelief. He fell backward, the snow catching him as the storm swallowed his last breath. Ethan dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his coat. The room was silent now, save the hiss of wind and the crackle of dying embers. He pressed his hand to the wound, half laughing, half gasping. "Reckon that's over." Then he heard it: faint footsteps, soft against the snow. Clara. She burst through the back door, twins still wrapped against her chest, her face pale but fierce. When she saw him, she froze. "You're bleeding." "Not bad," he lied, even as crimson spread down his side. She knelt beside him, pressing her hand against the wound. "You shouldn't have stayed." He smiled weakly. "Didn't have much else worth staying for." Tears filled her eyes, not of fear, but something deeper. "You do now." Outside, the storm howled one last time, then began to fade, leaving behind the soft, broken quiet of survival. By dawn, the snow had stopped. The world outside was clean again, untouched. Warren Reeves and his men lay buried beneath the drift, claimed by the mountain they had defied. Inside, Clara tended Ethan's wound, her movements calm, sure. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence between them had changed, no longer hollow, but heavy with the promise of something new. He watched her feed the twins near the fire, their tiny breaths fogging the air. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized he wasn't alone anymore. He'd lost blood, but gained something harder to name, something that burned brighter than the storm ever could. Because sometimes, in the wildest corners of the West, the only justice left was love strong enough to defy death itself. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in on wet boots and quiet mornings, a thin veil of mist sliding through the pines while the last of the drifts collapsed in tired heaps. Ethan's wound knitted slow and stubborn. Clara's hands learned the map of his shoulder the way a careful seamstress learns torn cloth. The twins fattened, bright-eyed and greedy for the bottle. The cabin smelled of yeast and pine tea, of boiled milk and wet leather. They were not a family yet, not by vows, not by law. But the shape of one hovered in the room like breath on cold glass. Word reached them in fragments. A trader passing through swore he'd seen riders combing the lowland creeks. A schoolmarm traveling to her sister's place said the Reeves brand was being burned from cattle and replaced by a new mark. "The brother," she whispered, buttoning her cloak, "called her Reeves. He's meaner and smarter." Warren's death didn't end anything. It began something. Ethan said little. He stacked wood. He kept the garden rows clean. He cut 3 small cedar plaques and carved careful letters by firelight. Mabel and Rose for the twins. Clara for the woman who still started awake some nights and reached for a door that would not open. He hung the names over the cradle, a prayer made of wood and work. Clara didn't cry when she saw them. She set a palm flat against her own name, as if to steady the wall. "Thank you," she said, and meant the kind of thank you that can't be repaid. The thaw turned the creek to a bright ribbon. Travelers found the switchback to Ethan's place by rumor stew that warmed the lungs, a cot that didn't bite the back, a silent man who never asked questions, a young mother who smiled without showing fear. They paid with jerky, flour, a spool of thread. One left a copy of Blackstone's Commentaries, its spine broken, pages marked by dirty thumbs. Ethan caught Clara tracing its margins at night while the twins slept, her lips moving with a word she kept testing. Custody. "What are you hunting in there?" he asked. "A map," she said quietly. "A way that ends with us still together." He glanced at the window where moonlight silvered the line of the ridge. "Maps around here lie. Then we'll draw our own." He wanted to say there was no ink for that kind of drawing. He wanted to confess, too, that sometimes he caught himself imagining a day with no visitors, no fear, only Clara's voice in the morning and two girls arguing over a wooden spoon. Instead, he sanded a length of pine into a rail for the cradle and listened to her breathe. The knock came in the blue-boned hour before dawn, urgent and steady. Ethan moved to the door with a rifle lowered but ready. Clara stood behind him, one twin at her breast, the other stirring in the cradle. The man on the porch wore the plain coat of a county officer and the tidy hat of someone who had never cut fence in a storm. He carried a folded packet tied with twine. Two others waited on their horses, faces turned away. "Ethan Ward?" the man asked. "Depends on who's asking." "Sheriff Abram Hale," he said, voice even. "Got business from the district court and a Pinkerton agent riding with us to see it done." He held out the packet. "We'll talk inside." Ethan didn't invite him. The sheriff stepped in anyway. Clara backed toward the hearth, the baby fussing. Hale placed the packet on the table and untied the twine. Paper whispered in the small room like a snake in dead grass. "Two matters. First, a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of murder in the death of Warren Reeves. Second, a petition for immediate transfer of physical custody of two minor children, female infants, to their paternal family, one Mr. Calder Reeves as guardian ad litem." Clara flinched as if struck. "Paternal," she repeated, the word a stone in her mouth. Hale's gaze flicked to her. "Are you Mrs. Clara Reeves?" She straightened. "I was." "Then you understand the law leans toward kin when a man dies without legitimate male issue." "Legitimate issue," she said, the syllables clean and angry. "They are legitimate. Legitimate daughters." A new voice cut in cool, educated, oily. The Pinkerton agent stood in the doorway now, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "Which is to say, no claim to land or stock. The brother inherits. The children belong under their uncle's roof." He smiled without warmth. "Safer there." Ethan took a single step that closed half the room. "You bring that talk into my house again, you'll ride down with less than a smile." Sheriff Hale raised a hand. "Easy. We're doing this by the book. Ward, you come with me to town. We see a judge. You speak your piece. Mrs. Reeves, the court will hear your position on custody. No one's stealing babes into the dark." Clara's voice was steady now, almost frightening in its calm. "Which judge?" Hale hesitated. "Elliot Pike." Clara's eyes moved to Ethan. "The Reverend's brother," she whispered. "He baptized our firstborn." She swallowed. "He drank at Warren's table." "Judge is a judge," the Pinkerton said. "In this territory," Ethan said, "a judge is a man, and men tend to eat with men who own cattle." Hale's jaw worked, tired. He looked at the twins, then back at Clara. "You can ride with them at sunrise. Bring the children. The court will decide temporary placement." "Temporary," Clara echoed, like someone testing a plank before stepping out over a gorge. The sheriff nodded, tapped the papers into a neat stack, and left. The Pinkerton lingered at the threshold, his smile returning like a knife pulled from a pocket. "Mrs. Reeves," he said softly, "you'll be relieved to know Mr. Calder has already prepared a nursery." Clara didn't blink. "Tell Mr. Calder I hope he sleeps in it." The agent's smile thinned. He tipped his hat and followed Hale into the dim. Hooves thudded. Voices faded. Only when the creek's chatter reclaimed the quiet did Ethan speak. "We run," he said. "Now, saddle the bay. I'll pack flour and—" "No," Clara said. He turned, disbelieving. "You want their law deciding where our girls sleep?" She crossed the room to him, laid the twin in his arms, as if daring him to argue, while holding a heartbeat. "If we run, we teach the girls to be fugitives before they learn to walk. If we go, we force the law to look us in the eye. You killed a man who came to kill us. I'll say that under oath." Ethan's mouth tightened. "Pike won't hear it. Then I'll make him." One. Her certainty frightened him because it felt like hope, and hope was a currency he'd buried with his wife. He stared down at the warm bundle against his chest. The baby sighed and pressed a damp mouth to his shirt, leaving a crescent of milk. "Sunrise," he said finally. "We ride together." They did. Clara wrapped the twins to her body and mounted the mare Hattie had traded them a month ago for 3 sacks of potatoes and 2 nights of peace. Ethan strapped his rifle to the saddle and swung up on the bay. They rode out beneath a sky the color of a bruise, the ridge casting long fingers over the thawed ground. Town had not changed. It never did, no matter what violence passed between its buildings. The church still leaned a little, as if listening for secrets. The saloon still breathed out stale ale at dawn. The courthouse door still stuck in damp weather. Sheriff Hale met them on the steps. "Judge is on the bench. We'll keep it quick." His voice tried for kindness and missed. The hearing was small but not private. 2 Reeves ranch hands stood at the back with hats in their fists, trying to look like citizens. The Pinkerton sat with his legs neatly crossed, a schoolbook open on his knee for effect. A clerk dipped pen in ink with a flourish meant to suggest gravity. Judge Elliot Pike, round and pink as his name, peered at them over spectacles that pinched a tidy nose. Hale read the charge. The clerk read the petition. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, do you deny killing Warren Reeves?" "I admit stopping a man who came to finish what he started on a fence post in January," Ethan said. "He died because he made us choose between breath and burial." The judge's mouth twitched. "Poetry doesn't alter homicide." Clara stepped forward, voice clean and ringing. "He saved my life. Warren bound me to a post and left me to bleed. I bled with our infants in the snow. If Mr. Ward had not cut me loose, the court would be hearing a petition for 3 burials instead of 2 guardianships." A murmur rustled the room. The judge rapped wood. "Mrs. Reeves, your grief is regrettable, but the decedent is not here to defend himself. The law, she said, holding up Blackstone like a lit lantern, says custody follows welfare where the father is dead and the mother is fit." Her hand didn't shake. "I am fit." Pike's smile was thin. "Fit at whose expense? Do you lodge with this widower?" He glanced at Ethan. "How long?" "Since winter." The judge's pen tapped the desk. "Unmarried cohabitation undermines your claim." Clara didn't look away. So would a grave. The Pinkerton stood smoothly. "Your Honor, Mr. Calder Reeves offers immediate placement in a lawful home with staff and resources. The mother is welcome to petition for visitation once settled." "That visitation," Clara repeated, as if translating from a language spoken by wolves. Ethan spoke low. "Judge, if you send those girls to that house, you finish a job Warren started." "Enough," Pike snapped. He shuffled papers he hadn't read. "This court orders." The doors banged open. Hattie blew in like useful weather, hair tucked under a scarf, eyes hot with riding. "Your Honor," she said without bow or apology, "I have a statement." She pushed past the clerk and slapped folded pages on the bench. "Signed by the midwife who attended Mrs. Reeves, and by 2 women who found blood by the old fence post where Warren used to hang coyotes." The judge looked irritated, then worried, then composed himself with the oily ease of a man who had practiced pretending to be fair. He skimmed and sniffed. "Allegations. We have no corroborated witness to the night of the killing." Ethan lifted his chin. "I'm the witness." "1. Convenient," Pike said. He set the pages aside as if they itched. "Sheriff, place Mr. Ward in custody pending a circuit trial. As to the children, temporary guardianship to Calder Reeves." The room went thin, soundless. Clara's fingers tightened on the twins. She did not cry. She looked like a woman memorizing a face she refuses to forget. Ethan didn't fight when Hale reached for his wrists. He looked at Clara instead, no speech, no promise, just a long, plain look that sought a road through this. The sheriff's iron was cold. The click of the cuff was the loneliest sound Ethan had heard since his wife stopped breathing. Hale murmured, almost sorry, "I'll keep you in the back room, not a cell. Don't test me." Outside, the Pinkerton waited with a clean handkerchief and cleaner conscience. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, almost gentle, "we can send a wagon for the little ones if you'd like a moment to compose yourself." Clara shifted both girls to one arm, freeing the other. She slapped the handkerchief from his hand. It hit the dust like a surrendered flag. "Tell Calder if he wants them. He can look me in the eye while he takes them." Calder Reeves arrived with the slow swagger of a man who has watched his older brother do cruel things and learned precisely which corners of the room to stand in while they happened. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the twins the way wealthy men inspect horses. "Sweet little mouths," he said. "We'll make them proper." Clara didn't move. "Define proper." "Quiet," he said, smiling. Hale stepped between them before the word could grow teeth. "The order stands," he said. "Mrs. Reeves, you can ride along to Calder's place and settle the babies." His eyes flicked to Ethan. "We'll sort the rest after the circuit judge comes through." "Another judge," Clara said flatly. "Not Pike," Hale said. A muscle in his cheek argued with the badge on his chest. "Ride careful." She could have screamed. She could have begged. Instead, she did something worse to the men around her. She measured the distance to the line and stepped precisely up to it. "I'll ride with them," Clara said. "I'll settle my daughters. Then I'll come back with a lawyer from Sheridan or Cheyenne who doesn't eat at Reeves' tables. And when the proper judge asks why the mother was denied custody without hearing, I'll say this town liked its dinners more than its children." The Pinkerton laughed softly, genuinely, the way boys laugh when a girl picks up a stone. "And who will pay your lawyer?" Clara turned her face toward Ethan. "We will." "Yes." Ethan's mouth opened, closed. He had money, some. A stash under the floorboards. A mare worth 2 sets of tools. 50 good fence posts. Hope was expensive. Freedom cost more. "Take what's in the trunk," he said. Hale's hand on his wrist tightened once, a warning that sounded almost like respect. Clara nodded. She kissed both twins, then looked at him a long time. "Don't let them turn your silence into guilt. Don't let them turn your fire into ash," he said. She mounted and rode in a small, dreadful procession. Hale first, because the badge demanded it. Clara next, because love does not learn its place. The Pinkerton behind, because men like him trust their reins, but never the people they follow. And Calder last, smiling like a ledger that always balances. They took his daughters. The door shut behind them. Ethan felt something fold and lock in his chest, a quiet that was not peace. Hale guided him to the back room of the jail, laid him on a cot, and left the cuffs through the night. The sheriff said nothing as he turned the key, but he did not turn the light down either. Near midnight, a figure slid through the side door Hattie, again, smelling of rain and iron. She lifted the blanket of the cot with a brisk, businesslike gesture. "You're not bleeding," she said. "Good, then you can listen." She put a bundle on the table. A lawyer's card from Cheyenne, a folded map with routes circled, and the thin roll of bills Ethan had hidden under a floorboard 2 winters ago. He started. "How?" "I run a store," she said. "I know what men hide and where." His smile was a broken thing, but it was still a smile. "You plan to rob me before or after you save me?" "After," she said dryly. "Clara will go as far as Calder's porch. She will hand him a basket and a look that could salt earth. Then she will ride on to Cheyenne." That's what she told me at the door while Hale pretended not to hear. "You have a choice. Let them crush you while you wait, or trust a woman who has lived through winter." Ethan closed his eyes. Behind them he saw Clara's face when the judge said temporary. He saw the twins' mouths searching in their sleep. He saw the cedar plaques catching firelight. "When the circuit judge arrives," Hattie said, "this town will want to say it did things decent. That means affidavits, witnesses, The midwife is ready to talk in open court. So is Warren's hand, who quit after he saw what was left by the fence. She paused. It also means you will likely need to sit quiet while men say ugly things about Clara. You up to that? He opened his eyes. The key lay under Hattie's palm. I can sit quiet, he said. I can do it forever. If it gets them home. Not forever, she said. Just long enough to let the right words do the shouting for you. She hesitated at the door. One more thing. Calder didn't come to raise girls. He came to keep power. He'll push Pike to hold a placement ceremony tomorrow for the town's eyes. A ceremony, Ethan repeated. Baptize his theft, Hattie said. He'll dress it in scripture. Better eat your anger now. Alone again, Ethan lay on the cot and counted wooden things, the cradle rail, the plaques, the handle of the door. Clara had closed with her jaw set. He counted until the counting turned into prayer, and then into sleep he did not deserve. Dawn broke clean. Sheriff Hale brought coffee that tasted like boiled nails and unlocked the cuffs without explaining why. Don't run, he said. If you run, I lose the only man in this room who knows where the line is. Ethan nodded. He didn't run. Saturday he listened to town wake. He measured the distance in his head from the jail to Calder's porch, to the courthouse, to the place where a man chooses between blood and mercy. He had already chosen once. He wondered if the Lord counted how many times a man's hands can hold a gun without becoming the thing he hates. Near noon, bells rang the church, calling people to something that had nothing to do with God. Through the window, he saw a small crowd gather in front of the Reeves house, a parlor of eyes. A table stood on the porch, draped with linen. On it, a silver bowl. The Pinkerton beside it like a maitre d' at a fine hotel. Calder emerged, immaculate, a twin in each arm as if he had earned them by wearing a clean shirt. People murmured. Some smiled with their mouths while pity frowned in their eyes. Hattie slipped into the jail again, hair wind-burned, grin grim. Clara got past him. She told him to hold them himself since he liked the weight of things that weren't his. Hattie's voice broke into a wry rasp. Then she rode like debt was behind her, and freedom was ahead. Cheyenne by morning if the horse holds. Ethan felt the first true breath of the day loosen his chest. The circuit judge might still be a week out. Pike might still poison the air. Calder might murder the word mother with paper. But Clara had chosen the long road over the quick surrender. The bells stopped. The crowd faded. The bowl glinted in the noon sun, empty as a promise. In the quiet that followed, Sheriff Hale leaned in the doorway, hat low, eyes hard. When this winds around to law instead of theater, he said softly, it will hurt before it heals. You ready for that? Ethan looked at his hands, scarred, clean, open. It already hurts, he said. Healing's the only thing left worth doing. Outside, a thin wind tugged at the linen on Calder's table until it flapped loose, showing the wood beneath plain, sturdy, too honest for its decoration. The day held its breath, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a woman rode toward a courthouse that did not yet know her name, but would, soon enough, learn how to say it without choking. The plains of Cheyenne stretched wide and endless, a sea of brown and thawing gold. The snow was gone, leaving ruts of mud and miles of prairie wind that carried no mercy and no lies. Clara Reeves rode through it alone, her coat tattered, her hands raw, her daughter's scent still clinging faintly to her dress. Every hoofbeat was a heartbeat borrowed from God. Every mile, a vow. I'll bring them home. By the time she reached Cheyenne, her lips were cracked, her horse limping, her eyes hollow but fierce. The city looked nothing like the valley. No mountain shadows, no familiar creek, just noise and smoke, and men shouting over wagons. She dismounted stiffly in front of the courthouse, walked inside without waiting for permission, and asked for one thing: a lawyer who doesn't dine with the Reeves. That's how she met Harriet Lowell, a woman with gray-streaked hair tied tight, her desk a chaos of files and coffee stains. She listened, didn't interrupt, and when Clara finished, Harriet said simply, "I'll take it." "Can you win?" Clara asked. Harriet looked her straight in the eye. "Win? No, but we can make them bleed ink, and sometimes that's enough to change a law." Back in the mountain town, Ethan waited in silence. The jail was small, but the guilt was large enough to fill it twice. Sheriff Hale brought food and news in equal measure. Calder's placement ceremony had drawn the church folk and the curious. Pike had signed a temporary guardianship order. Nothing final yet, but every word written on paper made truth harder to reach. Then one dawn, a telegraph arrived for Hale. He read it twice before unlocking Ethan's door. "She did it," he said, voice quiet. "Filed a petition with the territorial court in Cheyenne. Claims unlawful custody transfer, judicial conflict of interest, and tampering with evidence in the murder case. They're sending an investigator." Ethan rose slowly, disbelief turning into something like breath. "She made it that far. She's tougher than both of us," Hale said. "Get ready. You'll be called to testify again, this time with someone who's actually listening." 2 weeks later, the circuit judge arrived. Judge Barstow, an older man whose face carried no warmth, only weariness. But his first act was to order Pike removed from the bench, pending inquiry. His second was to summon every witness from the valley, including Clara, who returned under escort 3 days later. When she stepped into town, her presence alone turned every whisper into silence. She had changed, not broken, but sharpened. Her eyes no longer searched the ground. She wore no mourning black, no shawl of shame, only a clean gray dress, and the calm of a woman who'd already walked through hell. The hearing lasted all day. Harriet Lowell stood beside her, voice clear and unyielding. She read the midwife's statement aloud, every line describing Warren's cruelty. She presented the confession of a ranch hand who'd seen Warren tie the post himself, and when the Pinkerton tried to speak, Harriet cut him clean with a single line. "Sir, your wages are paid by the man who ordered this woman's death. Sit down." Ethan testified next. His voice was steady. He told them about the snow, the babies, the breath he thought he'd lost when he saw them still moving. He didn't beg for mercy. He didn't argue the shot. He just said, "He would have killed them. I made sure he didn't." The room was silent for a long time after that. By sunset, Judge Barstow gave his ruling. The court finds insufficient evidence to indict Mr. Ward for the death of Warren Reeves. The act, though violent, was provoked by defense of life and is deemed justified. A murmur rippled across the benches. Barstow raised a hand. "As for custody of the minor children Mabel and Rose Reeves," he continued, "this court recognizes Clara Reeves as their mother, fit and lawful guardian. The petition of Calder Reeves is hereby void. Any further claim will be met with contempt." Then, for the first time all day, his voice softened. "Mrs. Reeves, this territory owes you more than a verdict. It owes you safety. I can't promise that, but I can give you paper that says the law stands beside you, and sometimes that's enough." Clara bowed her head. "It's more than we had." That night, when the crowd had thinned and the lamps were low, Ethan found her outside the courthouse steps. She stood beneath a half-moon, her hair loose, the wind catching strands of it like threads of firelight. The twins slept inside with Harriet. "You did it," he said. She smiled faintly. "We did." He shook his head. "I didn't ride that far." "No," she said softly. "But you waited, and that's harder." He looked down at his hands, scarred and raw. "What now?" Clara's gaze lifted toward the ridge beyond the valley. "We go home. Not to hide. To live." Ethan stepped closer, searching her face. "You sure?" She met his eyes, steady and clear. "I was left for dead once, Ethan. Now I'm done surviving. I want to live." He smiled, small but real. "Then let's build something that lasts." Weeks later, the mountains bloomed again. The creek ran wide and clean. The sign over the cabin door read, "The Hearth at Bitter Creek," letters carved by Ethan, painted by Clara. Travelers began stopping by, drawn by the smell of bread, and the story whispered from town to town about a man who defied a baron and a woman who took the law to war. The twins grew stronger, their laughter echoing through the pines. And some nights, when the fire burned low, Clara would hum an old lullaby, not to silence fear, but to honor the sound of living. Ethan would sit beside her, sharpening tools he no longer needed to fight with, just to keep his hands busy while her voice filled the space. They never spoke of Warren Reeves again. Some ghosts deserved to stay buried under snow. But when travelers asked if the story was true, if a rancher once carried a dying woman and 2 infants through a blizzard, Ethan would smile. the kind that hides both pain and pride. Depends on who you ask, he'd say. But I reckon some storms are worth walking into. And across the hearth, Clara would lift her eyes and answer softly, as long as someone's waiting on the other side. The years that followed were not easy, but they were earned. The winters still came fierce and white, but never as cruel as that first one. Each season carved its mark into the valley, the river cut deeper, the grass grew taller, and the cabin that had once been a refuge for the dying became a home for the living. Travelers along the Bitter Creek Trail learned to look for the lantern that burned outside the Ward cabin, a promise of warmth when the night turned black. Ethan rebuilt the stable, added a second room, and taught the twins how to ride before they could read. Mabel had his steady hands. Rose had Clara's fire. Together they grew wild and free, daughters of the land, untouched by shame. Clara kept the ledger for the small trading post they built near the ridge. She never called herself a businesswoman, but she understood numbers better than most men who claimed to. Every time a wagon stopped, she offered stew and coffee before price. Word spread not just of good food, but of honesty in a land that had nearly forgotten what that was. At night, when the chores were done and the lamps were dim, Ethan would sit on the porch with a cup of strong coffee, watching the moon rise over the creek. Clara would join him, sometimes silent, sometimes singing the same lullaby she had once whispered through cracked lips. And every time, when she reached the final verse, he would take her hand, that same rough, calloused hand that had once torn wire from her wrists, and hold it as if it were the most delicate thing on earth. There were still ghosts in their lives, but they no longer haunted, they watched. The wind that swept the valley carried whispers of all the people who hadn't made it, the ones buried beneath snow and pride. Ethan listened sometimes, not in sorrow, but in thanks, because he understood now that saving someone wasn't about being stronger, it was about staying when everyone else turned away. One spring evening, as the sun melted into gold behind the ridge, Clara leaned against his shoulder and said, "You think the world ever changes, Ethan?" He smiled faintly. "No, but we do. And that's enough to start over." Below them, the twins chased fireflies in the tall grass, their laughter bright as church bells. The river glowed like glass, and for the first time in years, the sound of the wind through the pines no longer spoke of warning, only of peace. Because some stories don't end when the danger passes. They end when the heart finally believes it's safe to rest. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like. Subscribe to the Western Trail for more cinematic tales of love, courage, and redemption from the American frontier. Tell us in the comments what part of Clara and Ethan's journey moved you the most.